The early morning light filtered through the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan as Olivia Bennett walked through the revolving doors of Sterling & Price, the most prestigious law firm in New York City. Her modest navy blazer and pencil skirt made her petite frame blend perfectly into the background of power suits and designer briefcases. At 28, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her auburn hair neatly secured in a low bun, her attentive green eyes missing nothing as she navigated the marble lobby. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Another admin hire, muttered Blake Thompson, glancing at her resume without interest. Legal secretary with administrative experience. Great. Another paper pusher who thinks she understands law. Olivia said nothing as she adjusted the strap of her simple leather messenger bag. She'd learned long ago that first impressions at corporate offices were formed quickly, and corrections rarely changed them. Her employment paperwork read exactly what it was supposed to read. Former executive assistant seeking specialized professional development. What the documents didn't mention was the 4 years she'd spent providing critical research and draft work for some of the country's most successful competitive shooters at a private training facility in Virginia. The law firm buzzed with activity. Sterling & Price's competitive shooting team was serious business here, and the attorneys carried themselves with the confidence of people who'd won major tournaments. Lead counsel Victor Chambers, a weathered veteran with 25 years of law practice and shooting championships under his belt, barely looked up when Thompson introduced her. "Put her with document processing," Chambers said dismissively. "Let her handle the correspondence and meeting schedules. Maybe she'll learn something useful watching the real competitors work." Olivia nodded politely, carefully hiding her reaction to the casual dismissal. She'd heard it before. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely 125 pounds, she didn't fit anyone's image of what a competitive marksman should look like. The firm had unspoken standards for their shooting team members, standards she'd never meet just by looking at her. But expertise didn't disappear just because preconceptions couldn't recognize it. Her assigned workspace was standard office issue. Basic desk, ergonomic chair, desktop computer, filing cabinet. While other administrative staff decorated their areas with family photos and personal items, Olivia unpacked specialized journals about competition shooting, ballistics calculations, and advanced handgun mechanics. These weren't ordinary magazines. They were specialized publications most casual shooters never saw, filled with margin notes in her precise handwriting. "Planning to become a gun expert or something?" asked Daniel Reed, a junior associate whose desk was adjacent to hers. Daniel was everything Olivia wasn't: tall, broad-shouldered, confident, and loud. He'd arrived with stories about his college shooting team and dreams of making partner through both legal brilliance and competition victories. "Just like to understand how things work," Olivia replied quietly. "I'm already studying the tournament regulations for the upcoming corporate league." Daniel laughed. "Understanding and doing are two different things. Wait until you actually get behind a pistol at the range. Theory doesn't mean much when you're trying to hit targets under competition pressure." Olivia almost smiled at that. Competition pressure. She'd helped elite shooters achieve championship-winning scores, calculating optimal stances and breathing patterns while seasoned competitors took the credit, but she simply nodded and returned to organizing her desk. The next morning brought her first glimpse of the firm's shooting program's intensity. Sterling & Price's corporate shooting team was legendary throughout legal circles. Attorneys came from across the country hoping to join the prestigious firm, partly because of its dominant position in the corporate shooting league. The centerpiece of their training facility, located in the building's basement, was a state-of-the-art electronic targeting system with precision scoring down to the millimeter. "Only champions belong on our team," declared Eleanor Price, the firm's managing partner, as she briefed the latest group of associates. She was an imposing figure, silver-haired and elegant, with a wall of trophies displayed prominently in her office. We maintain this facility because excellence in shooting translates to excellence in the courtroom. Precision, focus, control. These are the hallmarks of a Sterling and Price attorney. Olivia stood in the back of the group taking notes. Not about shooting techniques, but about the electronic targeting system's calibration, the lighting conditions, and the air circulation patterns. The senior attorneys assumed she was documenting procedures for administrative purposes. They had no idea she was analyzing environmental factors that affected accuracy with the precision of a professional coach. During the first practice session, she was assigned to administrative duty. While attorneys took turns at various distances, Olivia organized score sheets, scheduled range time, and performed secretarial tasks. But she also watched every shot, every stance, every environmental factor that influenced accuracy. She noticed things others missed. How the HVAC system created subtle air currents that affected shot placement. How lighting changes altered sight. Picture perception. How microscopic stance adjustments could dramatically improve stability. "Hey, Secretary," called out attorney James Williams during a break. "Stop daydreaming and get back to work. These score sheets won't organize themselves." Olivia nodded politely and continued her tasks. Williams was typical of the attorneys here. Talented, confident, but limited by conventional thinking. He'd achieved respectable scores through solid fundamentals and good equipment. He'd never had to make impossible shots under impossible conditions. Never had to analyze environmental variables like they were legal precedents because someone's championship depended on it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Don't take it personally," whispered Megan Rodriguez, one of the few female paralegals at the firm. Megan was a client relations specialist who befriended Olivia during lunch breaks. "Williams thinks anyone who isn't a six-figure attorney shouldn't be allowed near the shooting range. It's just how things work around here." "It's fine," Olivia replied, though she appreciated Megan's kindness. "I'm here to learn." But as the days passed, Olivia began to notice patterns that troubled her. Scoring inconsistencies that shouldn't happen. Sights going out of calibration overnight. Pistols developing mysterious accuracy problems. When frustrated, attorneys brought their complaints to the administrative desk. It was always Olivia they found when seeking explanations for their suddenly declining scores. She had an uncanny ability to spot problems that stumped experienced shooters. Slight inconsistencies in trigger pull. Microscopic sight alignment issues. Inconsistencies in stance that created tension patterns. Skills that seemed supernatural to observers who didn't understand her technical knowledge. "How does she do that?" Daniel asked Thompson after watching Olivia identify a nearly invisible crack in a sight mount that had been causing wild shots all morning. "Lucky guess," Thompson replied, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Olivia said nothing. She'd learned these skills through necessity, working with shooters who made shots that pushed the boundaries of human capability. When you were responsible for ensuring their equipment functioned perfectly under extreme conditions, you developed an almost mystical understanding of how pistols behaved. Late at night, while others socialized or relaxed, Olivia studied competition footage. She tracked how lighting changes affected sight picture, how background noise influenced concentration, how minute variations in ammunition created different recoil patterns. The other staff members called her antisocial. The attorneys labeled her dedicated but limited. Nobody asked about her previous experience. Her employment paperwork was routine, unremarkable. Former executive assistant seeking specialized professional development. What they didn't know was that she'd spent 4 years making elite shooters look legendary, providing the technical expertise that turned ordinary scores into championship wins. But corporate culture was corporate culture. Without the proper legal degree and partnership track, she'd never receive official recognition as a shooter. She was support personnel, invisible and unacknowledged, no matter how critical her contributions might be. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same system that created champions often ignored the people who made those champions possible. But Olivia had made peace with invisibility long ago. Recognition was less important than competence, and competence was something she possessed in abundance. As her first month at Sterling & Price ended, she felt the familiar weight of being underestimated. But she also sensed opportunity. The competitive environment, the advanced equipment, the emphasis on precision shooting, all of it called to skills she developed in private. Somewhere in the distance, the regional championship tournament loomed just 3 months away. According to managing partner Eleanor Price, only champions could represent Sterling & Price. Olivia looked through the glass walls of the office at the Manhattan skyline and wondered if the managing partner might be wrong about that. After all, champions weren't born. They were made by people nobody noticed, using skills nobody recognized until the moment when impossible became inevitable. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Olivia approached. Her desk, her notebook tucked under her arm. 6 weeks into her position, she'd settled into a routine that kept her invisible but invaluable. While attorneys practiced at the shooting range, she maintained their schedules with an expertise that quietly amazed even veteran legal assistants. "Bennett," barked Chambers as he strode toward her desk. "We've got a problem with the new batch of competition pistols. 5 separate attorneys showing accuracy issues. Figure out what's happening." Olivia nodded and began her investigation. Within hours, she'd identified the source: improperly sized grip panels from the manufacturer. The fix was simple for someone who understood the microscopic tolerances involved, but it would have taken most gunsmiths days to diagnose. "How the hell did you spot that so fast?" muttered Senior Associate Brooks, watching over her shoulder as she explained the needed adjustments. "Just experience," Olivia replied quietly, not mentioning that she'd seen similar issues dozens of times while supporting elite competitors. Problems that could mean the difference between championship glory and devastating defeat, solved by someone whose name never appeared in competition results. Experience. Chambers had overheard and approached with a skeptical expression. "You've been here 6 weeks, Bennett. Before that, you were pushing paper at some backwater Virginia executive office. Don't get ahead of yourself." The dismissal stung more than Olivia let show. Chambers wasn't entirely wrong about her official record, but he was completely ignorant about what that record didn't reveal. She'd spent 4 years at that backwater facility working alongside Jonathan Miller, a legendary competition shooter, whose impossible accuracy had become the stuff of shooting folklore. Miller had been different from other elite marksmen. While they relied on expensive equipment and computer-analyzed stances, he trusted feel and intuitive adjustment. Olivia had become his technical partner, the person who analyzed his equipment and calculated environmental factors that made his legendary scores possible. "Get those pistols back in service," Chambers continued. "And next time, don't take so long with simple administrative tasks." Olivia bit back her response. The simple administrative task she just performed had corrected manufacturing defects that would have caused championship-losing performance, but explaining that would require revealing knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. "Yes, sir," she said instead, returning to her work. Later that afternoon, during the firm's practice session, the consequences of underestimation became clear. Daniel Reed was attempting a challenging series of shots at 25 meters using one of the pistols Olivia had diagnosed. The target was standard competition size, but the lighting had been adjusted to simulate tournament conditions. "Adjust your stance for stability," instructed Thompson. Remember your fundamentals: grip, sight alignment, trigger control. Daniel made his adjustments based on his training and fired. The shot missed the center ring by nearly 2 inches, striking well left of the bullseye. Frustrated, he tried again with similar results. "Must be the sights," Daniel muttered, checking his equipment. Olivia watched from the administrative desk, noting details the instructors missed. The building's HVAC system had kicked on, creating subtle air currents that affected shooting conditions. The lighting wasn't consistent across the entire range, creating shadows that altered perception. The background noise from construction outside was creating inconsistent distraction patterns. "Let me check that pistol," she offered quietly. "The pistol's fine," Thompson snapped. "Reed just needs more practice with the fundamentals." But Olivia had already spotted the real issue. Daniel's grip tension was slightly inconsistent, probably from the stress of performing in front of senior partners. She could correct it in seconds with a simple adjustment suggestion, but only if someone listened to her. "Mr. Thompson," she said carefully, "I think there might be a grip consistency issue affecting stability. I think you need to stick to scheduling and let the real shooters handle training," Thompson replied coldly. "When we need administrative advice, we'll ask for it." Olivia fell silent, watching as Daniel continued to miss shots that should have been routine. The frustration was building in his face, the kind of doubt that could destroy a shooter's confidence permanently. She wanted to help, but the hierarchy was clear. Administrative personnel didn't offer tactical advice. That evening in the break room, the conversation at Daniel's table centered on the day's failures. "I don't understand it," he said, picking at his lunch. "I've made shots like that dozens of times. Today, it was like the pistol was cursed." "Maybe you're just having an off day," suggested paralegal Tony Garcia. "Happens to everyone." "Or maybe the pressure's getting to you," added associate Kevin Murphy. "The partners were watching today, and that changes everything." Olivia sat at a nearby table with Megan, listening to the conversation while reviewing scoring data for the next day's practice. She knew exactly what had gone wrong with Daniel's shooting, and she knew how to fix it. But speaking up would violate unspoken protocols and likely earn her more hostility from the senior attorneys. "You look like you want to say something," Megan observed quietly. "It's not my place," Olivia replied, though her conscience was bothering her. Watching a capable shooter struggle with preventable issues felt like a betrayal of everything she'd learned during her years with Miller. "Maybe not officially," Megan said, "but unofficially? If you can help someone improve, isn't that worth something?" That night, Olivia made a decision that would change everything. She waited until the office was quiet, then slipped into the shooting range using her administrative access. She retrieved the practice logs and scoring data, then created a detailed analysis of Daniel's performance patterns. It took less than an hour, but the precision required was beyond what most shooting coaches could achieve. She was placing the analysis in Daniel's desk drawer when footsteps echoed across the darkened office. Attorney Williams emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable in the dim emergency lighting. "Working late, Bennett?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew what she'd been doing. "Just completing some administrative tasks," Olivia replied carefully. Williams studied her for a long moment. "That's Daniel Reed's performance data, isn't it? The one who was struggling today." Olivia's heart rate increased, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir. I noticed some patterns during data entry that might be helpful." "Patterns?" Williams stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Let me make something very clear, Bennett. You are not a coach. You are not an instructor. You are administrative personnel, and administrative personnel do not make unauthorized analyses of attorney performance data." "I was just trying to help." "Help?" Williams interrupted. "You want to help? Then stay in your lane. Schedule the meetings, handle the correspondence, and leave the real work to people who know what they're doing. If I catch you playing analyst again, you'll be reassigned to document storage faster than you can blink." The threat hung in the air between them. Olivia nodded silently, but inside anger was building. Williams didn't understand what he'd just dismissed. The unauthorized analysis she'd made would improve accuracy by significant margins. Her expertise could help every shooter on the firm's team perform better. But hierarchy and prejudice were more important than results. "Are we clear?" Williams demanded. "Yes, sir," Olivia replied. But as she returned to her apartment that night, her mind was already working. Williams represented everything wrong with corporate structure. Competent enough to maintain the status quo, but too rigid to recognize exceptional capability when it appeared in unexpected forms. He saw her as a threat to established order, not as an asset to be utilized. The next morning brought vindication, though Olivia couldn't enjoy it. Daniel's first shot struck the bullseye dead center. His second shot was equally accurate. The pistol performed flawlessly, responding to his input with precision that amazed even the senior partners. "Outstanding shooting, Reed," Chambers announced. "Whatever you did differently today, keep doing it." Daniel beamed with pride, unaware that his sudden improvement came from having found and implemented the analysis left in his desk drawer by someone he barely acknowledged. Olivia watched from her administrative station, feeling both satisfaction and frustration. She'd helped a fellow employee improve, but the success would be attributed to everything except her contribution. Williams caught her eye across the range and nodded slightly. The message was clear. This was how things worked at Sterling and Price. Support personnel remained invisible, no matter how critical their contributions might be. But Olivia was beginning to realize that invisibility might be temporary. The firm was building towards something significant. The regional championship tournament was approaching rapidly. And when that moment arrived, she intended to be ready. Whether the attorneys appreciated her capabilities or not, the office lights hummed overhead, carrying the scent of coffee and the promise of challenges ahead. In the distance, that impossible tournament waited. A competition reminder of the limits everyone accepted. Everyone except Olivia Bennett, who was beginning to understand that some limits existed only in the minds of those who'd never tried to exceed them. The corporate weather turned hostile in Olivia's 8th week at Sterling and Price. Heavy rain pounded against the glass walls of the Manhattan skyscraper, bringing unpredictable mood swings among the attorneys who prided themselves on controlled precision. It was perfect weather for focused practice, but terrible weather for maintaining composure. Olivia arrived at her desk to find chaos. Overnight, the electronic scoring system had malfunctioned, and humidity was playing havoc with grip consistency. 3 separate practice sessions were showing scoring anomalies, and the morning's schedule was backing up as frustrated attorneys waited for solutions. "Bennett." Chambers' voice cut through the morning air like a closing argument. "Get this. Range operational now. We've got VIP clients coming this afternoon, and I won't have equipment failures embarrassing this firm." Olivia nodded and began her diagnostics, working with the focused efficiency that had become her trademark. The problems were complex but solvable. Moisture infiltration in electronic sensors, temperature fluctuations affecting sight picture, and barometric pressure changes influencing perceived recoil. For someone with her background, these were routine challenges. But as she worked, she became aware of whispered conversations among the senior attorneys. Words like overstepping and forgetting her place drifted from their direction. Williams in particular seemed agitated by her ability to solve problems that stumped more experienced shooters. "She's making us look bad," she heard him mutter to Thompson. "An administrative assistant shouldn't be outperforming certified instructors." "Maybe she's just good at her job," Thompson replied, though his tone was uncertain. Or maybe she's hiding something, Williams shot back. Nobody transfers from an assistant position and immediately starts performing miracles. I want her background checked thoroughly. Olivia's hands never paused in their work, but her mind was racing. A background check would reveal her official record, which was exactly what it appeared to be, executive assistant with standard qualifications. But it might also prompt questions about why such a junior person had been assigned to work with elite competitors. Questions that could expose the depth of her previous work. The range was returned to operation just as the first VIP vehicle approached the building. Through the office windows, Olivia watched the convoy of luxury cars navigate the rain-slicked streets. Chambers had mentioned important clients, but the level of preparation suggested these weren't ordinary visitors. "Form up for demonstration," Chambers commanded, and the firm's shooting team assembled at the practice range. Olivia remained at her desk, but she could see everything from her position. The VIP group included potential major clients, legal, industry journalists, and what appeared to be corporate league officials. The demonstration began routinely enough. Experienced attorneys made impressive shots at challenging distances, showcasing the firm's precision and expertise. But as the demonstration intensified with more difficult scenarios, problems began to emerge. The atmospheric conditions that had plagued equipment all morning were equally challenging for performance. Background noise was chaotic. Humidity was creating optical distortions, and temperature fluctuations were affecting concentration in unpredictable ways. Even skilled shooters were struggling to maintain accuracy. Olivia watched with growing concern as shot after shot missed the intended targets. The VIPs were taking notes, their expressions increasingly skeptical. This was supposed to be a showcase of Sterling and Price's excellence, but it was turning into an embarrassing display of environmental limitations. "This is a disaster," Megan whispered, joining Olivia at her observation point. "Those potential clients are going to think our firm is second-rate." Olivia said nothing, but her analytical mind was working furiously. She could see patterns in the misses that revealed the environmental factors affecting each shot. HVAC airflow was varying dramatically at different points along the range. Lighting changes were creating visibility barriers that distorted sight. Pictures. The shooters were using standard techniques that couldn't account for such complex conditions. "Bennett." Williams appeared beside her, his voice tight with stress. "Check every pistol again. Make sure there are no equipment issues causing these misses." "The equipment is functioning perfectly," Olivia replied quietly. "The problem isn't mechanical. Then what is it?" Williams demanded. "These are expert shooters. They don't just start missing routine shots." Olivia hesitated. Explaining what she observed would require revealing knowledge that went far beyond her supposed experience level. But watching Sterling and Price's reputation being questioned by potential million-dollar clients was painful beyond endurance. "The environmental conditions are extremely challenging," she said carefully. "Multiple air currents, lighting variations, background noise fluctuations. Standard techniques might not be sufficient." Williams stared at her incredulously. "Are you seriously suggesting that our certified instructors don't know how to read shooting conditions?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Olivia replied. "I'm just observing that the environmental factors are more complex than usual." "Observing," Williams repeated mockingly. "Right. An administrative assistant is going to teach expert marksmen about shooting conditions. Stay in your lane, Bennett." But as the demonstration continued, the problems only worsened. A former military attorney missed a target at 15 meters by more than 2 inches. A champion shooter struggled to hit anything consistently beyond 20 meters. The VIPs were whispering among themselves, clearly unimpressed by what they were witnessing. Olivia felt physically ill watching the display. These were capable attorneys being defeated by conditions she could read and compensate for, but protocol demanded she remain silent while the firm's reputation suffered. "This is painful to watch," Megan murmured. "Is there anything you can do?" "Not without violating direct orders," Olivia replied, though every instinct screamed at her to intervene. The breaking point came when Chambers himself took position for a demonstration shot at 25 meters. As lead counsel, his performance would either salvage the demonstration or confirm the VIP's worst impressions. The target was challenging but achievable for someone of his caliber under normal conditions. Olivia could see immediately that he was making the same mistake as the others, relying on calculated adjustments instead of reading the actual environmental conditions. The airflow wasn't consistent, the lighting was fluctuating, and acoustic effects were creating invisible distractions. That would push his shot significantly off-center. Chambers fired. The shot missed by nearly 3 inches, striking well outside the bullseye. The silence that followed was deafening. Several VIPs shook their heads in disappointment. One of the corporate league officials made notes with obvious satisfaction. "Equipment malfunction," Chambers announced, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll investigate and reschedule the demonstration." But Olivia could see in his eyes that he knew the pistol was functioning perfectly. The problem was human, not mechanical, and that made it infinitely more embarrassing. As the VIP group departed, their unimpressed expressions spoke volumes about the demonstration's impact. Olivia remained at her desk, watching valuable client relationships drive away in luxury cars, while she possessed the knowledge that could have prevented the disaster. That evening, the mood in the office was somber. Word of the failed demonstration had spread throughout the firm, and morale was suffering. The attorneys sat apart from the support staff, their usual confidence replaced by defensive frustration. "I don't understand what happened out there," Daniel said to his colleagues. "Chambers is one of the best shooters I've ever seen. He shouldn't miss shots like that." "Maybe the equipment really was malfunctioning," Tony suggested hopefully. "Or maybe the conditions were just impossible," Kevin added. "Some days the elements win." Olivia listened to the speculation while reviewing environmental data from the demonstration. The conditions had been challenging but not impossible. She'd seen Miller make similar shots under worse circumstances using techniques most modern shooters had forgotten in their reliance on technology. "You look like you have thoughts about today," Megan observed quietly. "Everyone has thoughts about today," Olivia replied. But she was thinking about something Miller had told her once: the best shooters don't fight the environment. They dance with it. When you stop calculating and start feeling, impossible shots become inevitable. That night, Olivia made a decision that would define the rest of her time at Sterling and Price. She couldn't directly challenge the attorneys or violate the hierarchy, but she could prepare for the moment when her knowledge might be desperately needed. She began developing detailed environmental analysis techniques specifically adapted to the office range's unique conditions, not to share with anyone, but to be ready if opportunity arose. Because she was beginning to suspect that Sterling and Price was building toward something much more significant than routine practice. And when that moment came, she intended to be ready to prove that champions weren't born from titles and authority. They were forged by people who understood that expertise couldn't be confined by job descriptions or organizational charts. The storm that had been building over Sterling and Price finally broke on a tense morning in Olivia's 10th week. She arrived at her desk to find Attorney Williams waiting with a folder in his hands and an expression that promised trouble. "Bennett," he said without preamble, "we need to discuss your performance." Olivia set down her coffee and faced him calmly. "Is there a problem with my work, sir?" Williams opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be official documentation. "That depends on how you define your work. According to multiple reports, you've been making unauthorized analyses of shooting data, providing unsolicited technical advice, and generally overstepping your assigned duties." I've been performing administrative tasks as requested, Olivia replied carefully. If specific procedures weren't appropriate, I'd appreciate clarification. Clarification? Williams's voice rose slightly. How about this for clarification? You're administrative personnel. Your job is to schedule meetings and organize files. It is not to redesign shooting techniques, adjust performance parameters, or whatever other technical wizardry you've been performing. Olivia felt the familiar weight of being misunderstood settling on her shoulders. The observations I've made were necessary to correct environmental factors that affected accuracy. Every suggestion was intended to improve team performance. Improve performance, Williams repeated mockingly. Right. An administrative assistant with basic office training is going to improve techniques that certified instructors have already approved. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of managing partner Eleanor Price, who strode into the office area with obvious purpose. Her expression was grim, and Olivia noticed she was carrying a folder marked with Sterling and Price's executive letterhead. Williams, the managing partner, said curtly, I need to speak with Bennett privately. Williams looked surprised but nodded and left the area. Olivia remained composed, uncertain what to expect, but sensing that something significant was about to change. Managing partner Price studied her for a long moment before speaking. I've been reviewing your personnel file, Bennett. She paused. Interesting reading. Yes, ma'am, Olivia replied, though she wondered exactly what version of her file the managing partner had accessed. Your previous employer, Precision Performance Associates, had some very specific things to say about your capabilities, things that don't quite match your official job description. Olivia's pulse quickened. Precision Performance Associates had overseen her work with Miller and other elite competitors. If they'd been contacted, it meant someone was digging deeper than routine background checks. They mentioned, the managing partner continued, that you were instrumental in achieving several national shooting records at your previous position. Records that required, and I quote, extraordinary technical expertise and environmental analysis capabilities. The words hung in the air between them. Olivia remained silent, uncertain how much the managing partner knew or suspected. They also mentioned, Price added, that industry limitations prevented official recognition of your contributions. Something about qualification requirements and competition protocols. Now Olivia understood. Her background was being exposed, but in a way that might actually help rather than hurt her position. Yes, ma'am. I worked as technical support for advanced competitive shooting training. Technical support, the managing partner repeated. That's an interesting way to describe what your former supervisor called the most gifted analytical mind he'd encountered in 20 years of competitive shooting. The revelation hit Olivia like a physical blow. Miller had never told her he held such a high opinion of her capabilities. During their 4 years working together, he'd been professional but distant, rarely acknowledging her contributions beyond routine performance evaluations. Ma'am, let me finish, Price interrupted. Yesterday's demonstration was an embarrassment to this firm and to our reputation for excellence. Experienced attorneys missing routine shots while potential clients took notes. It was unacceptable. Olivia nodded, remembering her frustration at watching preventable failures unfold. What makes it even more unacceptable, the managing partner continued, is the possibility that we had someone on staff who could have prevented those failures, but who was being wasted on administrative tasks because nobody bothered to look beyond her official job description. The implication was clear, but Olivia wasn't sure how to respond. Admitting her capabilities would confirm that she'd been concealing relevant experience. Denying them would perpetuate the misunderstanding that was limiting her contribution. I have relevant experience in environmental analysis for competitive shooting, she said carefully. But I understand my current position and have been fulfilling those duties to the best of my ability. Price nodded approvingly. Diplomatic answer. But diplomacy isn't what we need right now. She opened her folder and withdrew several documents. We're planning something that will make yesterday's demonstration look like a practice round. A competition that will either restore confidence in Sterling and Price's capabilities or confirm our critics' worst assumptions about our decline. Olivia waited, sensing that something momentous was about to be revealed. The Precision Challenge, Price announced. 15 shots, maximum difficulty under the most challenging conditions we can create. The Corporate League Championship. Olivia's breath caught. The Precision Challenge was the most prestigious event in the corporate shooting league. 15 perfect shots would be required to win. It was beyond the capability most competitive shooters could even attempt. We're inviting the same VIP group back in 2 weeks, the managing partner continued, along with corporate clients, legal journalists, and leadership from 5 major competing firms. 15 demonstration shots with full electronic scoring and verification. Who will be taking the shots? Olivia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. That's the question, Price replied grimly. Chambers is our most experienced shooter, but yesterday's performance has shaken his confidence. The other qualified attorneys are equally affected by the demonstration failure. We need someone who can make 15 perfect shots under impossible pressure. Olivia said nothing, but her mind was already analyzing the challenge. 15 perfect shots in office conditions with industry observers witnessing every detail. The environmental factors alone would be staggering. Multiple air currents, lighting gradients, acoustic variations, and atmospheric effects that standard techniques couldn't account for. There's something else, the managing partner added. Intelligence suggests that one of our competing firms is planning to document our failure for marketing purposes. They want to demonstrate that Sterling and Price's legendary excellence is nothing more than myth. The stakes were becoming clear. This wasn't just about shooting. It was about firm prestige and legal reputation on an industry-wide stage. I want you to work with Chambers on environmental analysis for the competition, Price commanded. Use whatever expertise you've been hiding to help him succeed. This is bigger than job descriptions or organizational hierarchy. Olivia felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Relief that her capabilities were finally being recognized. Anxiety about the enormous pressure. And frustration that it had taken. A crisis to reveal what should have been obvious from the beginning. I'll do everything I can to help, she said quietly. Good, Price replied, but understand this. Failure is not an option. Sterling and Price's reputation is on the line. If we can't make these shots, our competitors will use that failure for years to come. As the managing partner left, Olivia remained at her desk, staring out at the city skyline that had suddenly become the backdrop of her world. 15 perfect shots in an office environment, filled with invisible challenges that could deflect even perfect aim. But for the first time since arriving at Sterling and Price, she felt something approaching hope. Not because the challenge was easy, but because someone finally understood that she possessed the knowledge necessary to meet it. The question wasn't whether the shots could be made. Miller had taught her that any shot was possible with sufficient understanding of environmental conditions. The question was whether Chambers could execute techniques that required abandoning conventional methodology in favor of intuitive environmental reading. That night, Olivia began the most intensive preparation of her career. Not for her own performance, but to transfer knowledge that might determine Sterling and Price's reputation in the eyes of the world. She had 2 weeks to teach Chambers what had taken her 4 years to learn. 2 weeks to turn 15 impossible shots into 15 inevitable ones. The office lights seemed to hum with anticipation as she worked, as if the building itself understood that something significant was about to unfold. Something that would prove champions weren't born from titles or hierarchy, but from the marriage of human expertise and environmental understanding. Olivia Bennett was about to discover whether her years of invisible contribution had prepared her for the moment when invisibility was no longer an option. Olivia's first training session with Chambers began at dawn the next morning in the empty shooting range where other attorneys couldn't observe. Managing partner Price had made it clear that her involvement was to remain unofficial until after the competition. Too many egos were at stake to admit that an administrative assistant was providing technical guidance to the firm's lead counsel. "Let's get something straight," Chambers said as they approached the shooting position. "I've been competing for 20 years. I don't need basic marksmanship lessons from someone who's never held a competition title." Olivia nodded respectfully. "I understand, sir. I'm here to provide environmental analysis support, not shooting instruction." "Good," Chambers replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced this arrangement would work. "Show me what you think you know about environmental conditions." Olivia had spent the previous night preparing for this moment. She'd analyzed performance patterns for the past month, studying how office conditions affected precision shooting. Her notebook contained detailed observations about airflow, lighting variations, and acoustic factors that most shooters never considered. "The key challenge in the precision challenge isn't difficulty," she began carefully. "It's the environmental complexity in the competition space. Standard shooting techniques assume consistent conditions throughout performance, but that assumption breaks down under pressure." Chambers looked skeptical but gestured for her to continue. "Air current velocity varies significantly at different points in the range," Olivia explained, pointing toward the practice area. "What we feel here at the firing position might be completely different 3 meters downrange and different again at 10 meters. "I know about reading conditions," Chambers interrupted. "Every competitive shooter learns to observe target stability and adjust accordingly." "Yes, sir," Olivia agreed. "But visible movement only shows surface conditions. For perfect precision, we need to read atmospheric layers that aren't visible to casual observation." She opened her notebook and showed Chambers diagrams she'd created during her years with Miller, complex charts showing how temperature differentials created invisible air currents, how lighting formed barriers that could distort sight pictures, how acoustic effects from building systems created concentration barriers along the sight line. Chambers studied the diagrams with growing interest. "Where did you learn this level of environmental analysis?" Olivia chose her words carefully. "Previous position involved supporting advanced competitive shooting. I worked with competitors who specialized in precision performance." "Competitors? Like who?" Chambers pressed. "Jonathan Miller," Olivia replied, watching Chambers' expression change immediately. "Miller," Chambers' voice carried new respect. "You worked with Jonathan Miller? He's a legend. Nobody's ever matched his perfect score record." "I provided technical support for his competition program," Olivia confirmed, not mentioning that she'd been the person who made those legendary scores possible. Chambers' entire demeanor shifted. If she'd worked with Miller, her credentials were unquestionable. Miller's reputation in the shooting community was beyond dispute, and anyone he trusted for technical support must possess exceptional capabilities. "What did Miller teach you about environmental reading?" Chambers asked, his previous skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. Olivia felt a moment of emotional connection, remembering her mentor. Miller had retired from competition 6 months after her departure, taking with him knowledge that existed nowhere else in the industry. "He taught me that environmental conditions aren't obstacles to overcome," she said quietly. "They're information to be read and utilized. When you stop fighting the atmosphere and start dancing with it, impossible shots become predictable." "Dancing with it," Chambers repeated. "That sounds like Miller. He always said marksmanship was more art than science at competition level." Olivia nodded. "He believed that technology could only take you so far. Beyond the basics, success depends on intuitive understanding of how light moves and air changes." Over the following days, Olivia began sharing techniques that hadn't been documented in any manual. Methods Miller had developed through decades of experience, refined through thousands of shots under impossible conditions. She taught Chambers to read thermal patterns that revealed air density changes. She showed him how to interpret ceiling vent positions that indicated airflow patterns. She explained how to feel acoustic pressure changes that affected concentration and stability. "This is incredible," Chambers admitted after a week of intensive training. "I've been shooting for 20 years, and I'm learning things I never knew existed." But as their sessions continued, Olivia began to notice a troubling pattern. Chambers was absorbing the theoretical knowledge quickly, but translating it into practical application was proving difficult. The intuitive aspects that came naturally to her remained foreign to his methodical, technology-dependent approach. "I understand what you're telling me," he said during one particularly frustrating session. "But when I'm behind the sights, I keep reverting to calculated adjustments instead of feeling the conditions." Olivia watched him struggle with growing concern. Chambers was a skilled marksman using conventional methods, but the precision challenge required abandoning conventional thinking. It demanded the kind of environmental intuition that took years to develop, and they had less than a week remaining. "Maybe we need to approach this differently," she suggested. "Instead of trying to change your entire methodology, what if we combined your technical skills with environmental analysis?" "How do you mean?" Olivia had been considering this possibility since their training began. "What if I served as your coach for the competition? I could provide real-time environmental analysis while you focused on execution." Chambers looked intrigued but uncertain. "Coaches are usually certified instructors themselves." "You don't have official qualifications?" "No," Olivia agreed. "But I have 4 years of experience reading environmental conditions for precision shots." Miller's coaches were always certified professionals. But I was the one who provided environmental analysis that made his impossible shots possible. The admission hung between them. Olivia had just revealed more about her previous role than she'd intended, but desperation was overriding caution. "You were Miller's environmental analyst?" Chambers asked with growing amazement. "The person who calculated conditions for his record scores?" Olivia nodded, feeling the weight of secrets finally being acknowledged. Official records credit him with those achievements, and rightfully so. He was the one who pulled the triggers, but the environmental analysis that made those shots possible came from techniques we developed together. Chambers stared at her with new understanding. "That's why your atmospheric knowledge is so advanced. You weren't just supporting competitive training. You were enabling legendary achievements." "I was part of a team," Olivia corrected. "Miller was the legend. I just helped him understand what the environment was doing." But even as she spoke, Olivia was beginning to realize something that would change everything. Chambers was a competent marksman, but he wasn't Miller. He didn't possess the intuitive brilliance that had made Miller legendary, and no amount of training could create that kind of natural ability. The competition was in 5 days, and industry observers would be watching Sterling and Price's capability through the sights of a single shooter. If Chambers failed, the consequences would extend far beyond personal embarrassment. That night, alone in her apartment, Olivia faced a possibility that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. What if the shots couldn't be made by Chambers, regardless of her environmental support? What if the only way to succeed was for someone with true atmospheric intuition to take the shots themselves? The firm policies were clear about who could represent Sterling and Price in official competitions. She didn't have the legal degree, the partnership track, or the shooting certification necessary for such a role. But she had something more important: the knowledge and instinct necessary to make 15 impossible shots under impossible conditions. As city lights glittered through her window, Olivia began to consider a course of action that would either save Sterling and Price's reputation or end her career in disgrace. Sometimes the most important victories were achieved by people nobody expected to fight for them. And sometimes champions emerged from the shadows where they'd been hiding all along. The morning of the Precision Challenge dawned gray and turbulent with April showers that made Olivia's heart sink. She arrived at the office 2 hours before the scheduled competition to find Chambers already there, staring through his practicoscope at the competition range with visible anxiety. "How are the conditions?" she asked, though she could already see the challenges they faced. "Terrible," Chambers replied grimly. "Cross currents, lighting gradients, acoustic variations, everything we trained for, but worse." Olivia studied the environmental factors with growing concern. Office climate systems creating conflicting air patterns, indicating complex currents. Light refraction created optical distortions that would make sight picture difficult. Building vibration suggested acoustic currents that would affect concentration unpredictably. "We can work with these conditions," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Remember what we practiced about reading thermal layers." But as the VIP convoy arrived, Olivia sensed Chambers' nervousness was approaching panic. The industry. Observers included corporate clients from 6 major companies, legal journalists and competing firm representatives whose opinions would influence future business decisions. The pressure was enormous, and Chambers was visibly struggling under its weight. Managing partner Price approached their position as the observation area filled with dignitaries. "How are we looking?" she asked quietly. "Challenging conditions," Olivia replied diplomatically, "but manageable with proper analysis." Price nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely reassured. "Chambers, you ready for this?" "Yes, ma'am," Chambers answered, though his voice lacked conviction. As the formal presentation began, Olivia positioned herself beside Chambers' shooting station with her environmental analysis equipment. She'd spent the previous week developing techniques for providing real-time atmospheric data during precision shots, methods that went far beyond standard coaching procedures. "Ladies and gentlemen," managing partner Price announced to the assembled observers, "today's demonstration represents the pinnacle of Sterling and Price's precision capability. The challenge requires 15 consecutive perfect shots, a sequence that tests the limits of both human skill and environmental awareness." Olivia felt the weight of industry attention focusing on their position. Through her observation, she could see competing firm representatives taking detailed notes, clearly hoping to document Sterling and Price's failure for their own purposes. "Lead counsel Chambers will be making the attempt," Price continued, "with environmental analysis support from our technical specialist." Several observers looked in Olivia's direction with obvious skepticism. Her modest attire and administrative appearance didn't match their expectations for professional shooting. "Support personnel. Wind analysis," Olivia whispered to Chambers as he settled into shooting position. "Surface current from the ventilation system at 2 miles per hour, but there's a thermal gradient at 3 meters creating cross currents." Chambers nodded and made his initial adjustments, but Olivia could see tension in his body language that would affect his accuracy. The pressure of industry observation was overwhelming his training. "Lighting barrier at 5 meters, she continued, reading environmental conditions that were invisible to everyone else present. Adjust sight picture 2 millimeters to compensate for refraction changes." Chambers made the correction, but his movements were mechanical rather than intuitive. He was following her instructions rather than feeling the environmental conditions himself, creating a dangerous disconnect between analysis and execution. "Take your time," Olivia advised. "The conditions are complex but readable. Trust the environmental data." But as Chambers prepared for his first shot, Olivia noticed something that made her blood run cold. One of the competing firm's representatives had produced a high-end camera, positioning himself to document the shooting position in detail. If Chambers missed, the photograph would be used for marketing purposes industry-wide. Thermal updraft from the floor heating, she whispered urgently. Adjust grip pressure 10% to compensate. Chambers made the adjustment and fired. The first shot struck just inside the bullseye, not perfect center, but acceptable. A collective breath of relief passed through the Sterling and Price representatives. The second shot was similarly adequate. The third showed improvement. But on the fourth shot, disaster struck. A sudden heating system surge created an unexpected air current that Olivia spotted too late to call adjustment. Chambers' fourth shot missed the perfect center by 3 millimeters, a failure in the exacting standards of the precision challenge. The scoring system flashed red, indicating the sequence was broken. Silence fell over the observation area like a funeral shroud. Chambers had failed before even reaching a third of the required 15 shots. The failure was public, witnessed by industry observers who were already making notes about Sterling and Price's inadequacy. Equipment calibration issue, managing partner Price announced quickly, though everyone present knew the equipment had functioned perfectly. Olivia felt physically sick, watching Sterling and Price's prestige crumble in real time. Competing firm. Representatives were smiling with satisfaction, having witnessed exactly what they'd hoped to see. Corporate clients were shaking their heads, questioning their relationship with a firm that couldn't maintain precision under pressure. Second, attempt authorized, Price declared. No competition rules typically allowed only one demonstration sequence. But Olivia could see that Chambers was devastated by the miss. His confidence was shattered, his hands were shaking, and his breathing was irregular. A second attempt under these conditions would likely be even worse than the first. I can't do this, Chambers whispered to her. The pressure is too much. I'm second-guessing every adjustment. Olivia looked at the assembled observers, at the cameras documenting Sterling and Price's failure, at the competing representatives who would carry news of this disaster back to their firms. Everything she'd worked for, everything Miller had taught her was being discredited because protocols prevented the right person from taking the shots. Ma'am, she said quietly to managing partner Price as she approached their position. I need to speak with you privately. Price looked confused but followed her away from the shooting station. What is it, Bennett? Chambers can't make these shots, she said bluntly. He's a skilled marksman, but not under this level of pressure. With these atmospheric conditions, are you suggesting we cancel the competition? Price asked incredulously. No, ma'am, Olivia replied, her heart pounding with the audacity of what she was about to propose. I'm suggesting that someone else should take the shots. Someone else who? Chambers is our most qualified shooter. Olivia took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either save the competition or end her professional career. Someone who has the environmental analysis capability necessary to make these shots without coaching. Price stared at her with growing understanding. You're talking about yourself. Yes, ma'am, Olivia confirmed. I know the protocols about certifications and firm representation, but I also know that Sterling and Price's credibility is being destroyed while we have someone present who can make these shots. Bennett, you're not qualified for... Ma'am, Olivia interrupted. I've been making shots like this possible for 4 years. The only difference is that now I'm asking to pull the trigger myself instead of telling someone else how to do it. Managing partner Price looked toward the observation area where competing representatives were clearly enjoying Sterling and Price's embarrassment. Her jaw tightened as she weighed protocols against results, policy against firm prestige. If you miss, she said quietly, this becomes an even bigger disaster. An administrative assistant failing after lead counsel already failed. If I miss, Olivia replied, we're no worse off than we are now. But if I succeed, we demonstrate that Sterling and Price's capability extends beyond conventional expectations. Price studied her face for a long moment, searching for confidence or competence that protocol said shouldn't exist. What she saw, there apparently convinced her that desperate times required desperate measures. 15 perfect shots, she said finally. If you miss, I'll take full responsibility for the decision. If you succeed, the credit goes to innovative training methods and environmental analysis techniques. Olivia nodded, understanding that success would be attributed to institutional capability, while failure would be blamed on individual incompetence. But personal recognition had never been her motivation. I'll need 10 minutes to analyze current conditions and make equipment adjustments, she said. Take whatever time you need, Price replied. At this point, we have nothing left to lose. As Olivia returned to the shooting station, she felt the weight of industry attention shifting to her modest appearance. Competing representatives were whispering among themselves, clearly amused that an administrative assistant was attempting what an experienced attorney had failed to achieve. But Olivia was no longer thinking about observers or consequences. She was entering the mental state Miller had taught her, where external pressure disappeared and only environmental conditions mattered. The office was speaking to her through air patterns and light currents, and she was ready to listen. 15 perfect shots in turbulent conditions lay between her and a target that would determine Sterling and Price's reputation for years to come. But for the first time since arriving at the firm, Olivia felt completely at peace. She was finally in her element. Olivia approached the competition pistol with the methodical precision of someone who had performed this ritual countless times before. The industry observers watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright mockery as the small administrative assistant prepared to attempt what their experienced attorney had failed to achieve. This should be interesting, she heard one of the competing representatives mutter in a sharp whisper. Sterling and Price so desperate they're using secretaries for precision demonstrations. Olivia ignored the commentary and began her environmental analysis. This wasn't about proving herself to skeptical observers. It was about reading the office atmosphere with the precision necessary to make 15 impossible shots inevitable. She started by studying air movement at various distances, noting how papers and fabric moved differently at specific points. The currents weren't consistent. They rarely were in office environments, but they were readable. Surface air from the ventilation system, 2 miles per hour. Thermal currents from the heated flooring creating cross currents at 3 meters, and ceiling duct patterns indicating downdrafts beyond 7 meters. What is she doing? One of the corporate clients asked managing partner Price. Environmental analysis, Price replied, though her own understanding of Olivia's methods was limited. Calculating atmospheric factors that affect precision shooting. Olivia took out a small notebook and began making calculations that drew amazed stares from observers accustomed to sophisticated electronic equipment. Temperature gradients, lighting variations, acoustic pressure changes, all translated into precise mathematical adjustments using techniques Miller had taught her years ago. She's using manual calculations, a legal journalist observed with obvious skepticism. No laser sight, no electronic compensation, no digital assistance. This is primitive methodology. But Olivia was operating on a level beyond their comprehension. The electronic equipment they considered essential was designed for standard conditions and predictable environments. Office shooting at competition level required understanding nuances that computers couldn't quantify, the way thermal layers created invisible barriers, how lighting formed pockets of distortion that could mislead perception, how microscopic acoustic changes affected concentration in ways that algorithms couldn't capture. 10 minutes passed as she studied conditions with the intensity of an artist examining a complex canvas. Every air current, every light reflection, every sound pattern provided data about environmental behavior along the sightline. Airflow varies at different points, she murmured to herself, making final calculations. Temperature gradient creates density barriers at 4 meters. Lighting forms a refraction zone at 6 meters. Acoustic pressure from building systems affects focus after 8 meters. The observers exchanged glances, clearly uncertain whether they were witnessing expertise or elaborate pretense. Several competing representatives were taking detailed notes, apparently planning to document Sterling and Price's desperation for marketing purposes. Olivia settled into shooting position, adjusting the pistol's precision sights with careful determination. The target was standard competition size, but through environmental distortion, it might as well have been a moving object. "No coach," observed one of the legal journalists. "This is highly irregular procedure." "She doesn't need a coach," Chambers said quietly, speaking for the first time since his failed attempt. "She's reading conditions that most of us can't even see." Olivia's breathing settled into the controlled rhythm Miller had taught her. Heartbeat steady, muscle tension minimal, mental focus absolute. The external pressure of industry observation faded away as she entered the meditative state necessary for precision shooting. Through her sights, she could see air currents distorting the target image. Cross flows at multiple points would push the bullet in subtle directions during its flight. Lighting would create perception challenges that changed along the sight. Line, acoustic variations would affect stability in ways that standard techniques couldn't predict. But Olivia wasn't relying on standard techniques. She was using intuitive understanding developed through 4 years of making impossible shots possible for Miller. Environmental reading that transcended mathematics, atmospheric awareness that operated below conscious thought. She made final sight adjustments based on conditions only she could perceive. Current compensation for airflow at 2 meters. Sight. Picture correction for lighting barriers at 5 meters. Grip adjustment for acoustic pressure beyond 8 meters. The pistol settled into perfect stability as Olivia prepared for the first of 15 shots that would determine Sterling and Price's credibility in the eyes of the industry. Office air filled with invisible challenges that could deflect even perfect. "Aim. Impossible conditions," muttered one of the competing observers. "No one can make accurate calculations with so many atmospheric variables." But Olivia had stopped calculating. She was feeling the environment with senses developed through years of patient observation. The office was speaking to her through thermal currents and pressure changes, and she was listening with the focused attention Miller had taught her was essential for perfect shots. 5 seconds of final environmental assessment. Air patterns were stabilizing into readable configurations. Light gradients were creating predictable refraction zones. Acoustic barriers were forming consistent pressure changes that could be compensated for with precise adjustments. Olivia squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure Miller had drilled into her muscle memory. The pistol fired with controlled recoil, sending its projectile through hostile atmospheric conditions toward a target that represented Sterling and Price's reputation. The electronic scoring system paused for verification, creating an eternity of silence. Industry observers watched through glasses, clearly expecting to document another Sterling and Price failure. Corporate clients held their breath, knowing that relationships and contracts depended on the next few seconds. Competing representatives calculated the marketing value of continued embarrassment for a firm that might be fundamentally flawed. Then the scoring system flashed green, perfect center hit. Shot 1 of 15. Without pause or celebration, Olivia readjusted for the shifting conditions. The first shot had changed the atmospheric pattern slightly. New thermal currents were forming from the discharge. Light was refracting differently through the minimal smoke. She compensated with microscopic adjustments. Second shot, perfect center. Third shot, perfect center. Fourth shot, perfect center. By the 5th perfect shot, the observation area had fallen completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke as the impossible became reality. The administrative assistant was achieving what the experienced attorney could not. Shot 6, perfect center. Shot 7, perfect center. Shot 8. Perfect center. Using manual calculations and environmental analysis techniques that seemed primitive compared to modern technology, Olivia was hitting with precision that the electronic scoring system registered as flawless. The kind of accuracy that competition shooters spent decades trying to achieve. Shot 9. Perfect center. Shot 10. Perfect center. Shot 11. Perfect center. The competing representatives who'd arrived hoping to document Sterling and Price's failure now found themselves witnessing a demonstration of capability that exceeded their own firm's standards. The corporate clients who'd questioned Sterling and Price's precision were suddenly taking notes about innovative training techniques they'd never considered. Shot 12. Perfect center. Shot 13. Perfect center. Shot 14. Perfect center. How is she making those calculations without electronic assistance? Asked one of the corporate clients. Experience, Chambers replied, his voice filled with new respect. She's been doing environmental analysis for precision shots longer than most of us have been competing. Olivia prepared for the 15th and final shot. The conditions had shifted again. Building systems had adjusted to the changing day, creating new currents. Lighting had altered as clouds moved past the windows. The challenge was greater then. When she began, but she adjusted with the fluid expertise of someone who read atmospheres as easily as others read text. Final shot. Perfect center. 15 consecutive perfect shots. A feat that hadn't been accomplished in corporate league competition for nearly a decade. The scoring system flashed with confirmation as applause broke out among the Sterling and Price representatives. Managing partner Price was the first to speak. Outstanding performance, Bennett. Absolutely outstanding. But Olivia simply secured the pistol and stepped back without celebration or emotional reaction. The shots had been successful because the environmental analysis was accurate, not because of individual heroics. She'd simply applied techniques Miller had taught her to conditions she understood better than anyone else present. The competing representatives who'd arrived hoping to document Sterling and Price's failure now found themselves witnessing a demonstration of capability that exceeded their own standards. The corporate clients who'd questioned their relationship with the firm were suddenly securing meeting times to discuss expanded contracts. How did she develop that level of precision without formal competition experience? Asked one of the legal journalists. Innovative training, Price replied, her voice filled with carefully crafted narrative. Sterling and Price believes excellence comes from unexpected sources when properly developed. As word of the successful demonstration spread throughout the legal community, the true magnitude of what had occurred began to sink in. An administrative assistant had broken the corporate league record using methods that challenged conventional understanding of precision shooting. But Olivia was already thinking beyond the competition. The shots had been successful. Sterling and Price's credibility had been preserved, and techniques Miller had developed were finally receiving recognition they deserved. Her personal vindication was less important than proving that human expertise could exceed technological limitations when properly applied. The office lights hummed with renewed energy. But Olivia no longer feared environmental challenges. She had just proven that champions weren't created by titles or hierarchy, but by people who understood that excellence emerged from the marriage of human intuition and environmental awareness. The 15 impossible shots had become inevitable, just as Miller had always promised they would. The transformation at Sterling and Price began immediately after Olivia's performance. But it wasn't the kind of change she had expected. Within hours, her employment file was being reviewed by senior partners, and by the next morning, corporate legal departments from across the country were requesting information about her environmental analysis techniques. Managing partner Price summoned her to the executive office 3 days after the demonstration, where she found her reviewing a stack of communications that seemed to grow larger each hour. "Bennett," she began, I've received formal inquiries from 7 different firms asking about your possible recruitment to their competitive teams. The corporate league wants to incorporate your environmental analysis methods into standard training programs, and 3 international legal associations have inquired about consulting arrangements to study your techniques. Olivia sat quietly, unsurprised by the attention, but uncertain how to respond to it. Recognition had never been her goal. Competence had always been sufficient. There's also this, Price continued, sliding a folder across her desk. Recommendation for immediate promotion to Strategic Performance Analyst with assignment to the firm's Competitive Development Division. Full recognition of your specialized expertise, official competition qualification waiver, and research budget for developing environmental analysis protocols. Olivia opened the folder and scanned documents. That would transform her from invisible support personnel to officially recognized specialist. Everything she'd worked toward for years, validated by 15 impossible shots. And if I prefer to remain where I am? She asked quietly. Price looked surprised. Bennett, this is a career-making opportunity. You'd be working with the industry's most elite competition programs developing techniques that could revolutionize precision shooting training. I understand the significance, Olivia replied. But I'm more interested in individual development than institutional structure. What she didn't say was that fame and recognition felt foreign after years of deliberate invisibility. The techniques she'd used came from Miller's teaching, refined through patient observation and dedicated practice. Turning them into bureaucratic training protocols seemed like a betrayal of their essential nature. At least consider the offers, Price urged. Your expertise is too valuable to waste on routine administrative duties. Olivia nodded politely, but her mind was already set. She'd proven her capabilities to herself and demonstrated that Sterling & Price's precision remained world-class. Personal advancement was less important than continuing the work Miller had started. Over the following weeks, the story of her 15 perfect shots grew beyond anything she could have anticipated. Legal publications described her as the secretary who redefined precision shooting. Corporate training programs studied her manual calculation methods, trying to incorporate human environmental intuition into electronic systems. Competing representatives who'd hoped to document Sterling & Price's failure instead found themselves requesting information about training techniques they couldn't replicate. But the most meaningful recognition came from the associates at Sterling & Price, who began seeking her guidance with genuine respect instead of dismissive tolerance. Daniel Reed approached her during lunch one afternoon, his previous arrogance replaced by humble curiosity. Olivia, he said, using her first name for the first time since her arrival. Would you be willing to teach me some of your environmental reading techniques? I keep thinking about those shots, and I realize I don't understand the first thing about atmospheric analysis. Of course, she replied, pleased that someone wanted to learn rather than simply benefit from her expertise. Megan Rodriguez joined them, having requested transfer to the competitive shooting program, specifically to study under Olivia's guidance. I've been documenting your environmental reading and pressure analysis methods, she said. Would you mind reviewing my notes to make sure I'm understanding the principles correctly? As word spread, Olivia found herself teaching informal classes to small groups of interested attorneys. Not formal instruction that would violate protocols, but mentorship. Sessions that focused on environmental awareness and atmospheric understanding. Students who'd struggled with conventional methods discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed when they learned to read conditions instead of calculating them. The most significant change occurred among the senior attorneys themselves. Williams, who'd been her harshest critic, approached her with unexpected humility 3 weeks after the demonstration. Bennett, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your capabilities, and my skepticism nearly cost us a critical competition. I'd like to learn from you if you're willing to teach. Olivia nodded, appreciating the courage it had taken for him to admit his mistake. Everyone learns at their own pace. What matters is being open to new methods when conventional approaches aren't sufficient. Chambers became her strongest advocate, crediting her with teaching him environmental awareness techniques that had improved his own shooting dramatically. She made me understand that precision at competition level is more about reading conditions than following procedures, he told anyone who would listen. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came in an unexpected form. 6 months after the demonstration, Olivia received a letter forwarded through industry channels. The return address showed it was from Miller himself, whom she hadn't seen since leaving Precision Performance Associates. "Dear Olivia," the letter began, "I wanted you to know how proud I am of your achievement. While I never mentioned your name due to competition requirements, I always knew your expertise would someday receive the recognition it deserved. The industry has been buzzing with stories of the secretary who made 15 perfect shots, and I recognized your environmental methodology immediately." The letter continued with personal details about Miller's current projects, including his regret that industry protocols had prevented official acknowledgement of Olivia's contributions. "The greatest shooters are often invisible," the letter concluded, "but that invisibility doesn't diminish their importance. Thank you for carrying on our work." Olivia read the letter 3 times, feeling emotions she'd suppressed for years finally finding expression. Miller had recognized her value, even when she doubted it herself, and his confidence in her abilities had ultimately proven justified. A year after the demonstration, Sterling and Price had become the industry's premier environmental performance training facility. Students came from around the country to study techniques that emphasized human intuition over technological dependence. The firm's reputation for producing exceptional competitors was built on principles Olivia had introduced, though she insisted on remaining officially unofficial in her teaching role. "Why don't you accept formal recognition?" Megan asked during one of their evening conversations. "You've revolutionized how the industry approaches precision shooting." "Because formal recognition changes the nature of the work," Olivia replied. "When expertise becomes institutional, it often loses the personal connection that makes it effective. I'd rather remain available for individual instruction than become part of a bureaucratic training system." The Precision Challenge remained the industry standard, though it was no longer considered impossible. Several students had achieved perfect scores using techniques Olivia had taught them, proving that her methods could be transferred to others with sufficient dedication. But Olivia's greatest satisfaction came from watching formerly struggling shooters discover their own capabilities through environmental awareness training. Students who'd been ready to quit competitive programs found new confidence when they learned to trust their observational skills instead of relying solely on technological assistance. Late one evening, as city lights glittered through the office windows, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her from invisible support personnel to reluctant legend. The 15 perfect shots had validated her expertise, but more importantly, they had created opportunities to share knowledge that might otherwise have died with Miller's retirement. She thought about the students who would carry these techniques to new firms, spreading environmental awareness throughout competitive communities. The expertise that had once existed only in private programs was now becoming standard training, ensuring that future generations of shooters would understand the marriage of human intuition and atmospheric science. True excellence, Olivia had learned, wasn't measured in personal achievements or official recognition. It was found in the capabilities she developed in others, the confidence she helped them discover, and the skills they would pass on long after her own career ended. The office held its secrets close, but it also shared them with those patient enough to listen. Olivia had learned to speak its language, and now she was teaching others to hear its voice. In a world increasingly dependent on technology, she was proof that human expertise remained irreplaceable when properly developed and applied. Some champions wore expensive suits and carried prestigious titles. Others wore modest attire and carried simple notebooks. Both changed the world in meaningful ways. But only one asked for nothing in return except the opportunity to perfect skills that created excellence when conventional methods failed. As she prepared to leave for the day, Olivia smiled at the irony of her situation. She'd spent years being underestimated because she didn't fit anyone's idea of what a competitive shooter should look like. Now she was training people who would achieve their own perfect shots using techniques she developed in silence. The greatest achievements, she understood now, often came from people nobody noticed until the critical moment when everything depended on them, and the most important victories were measured not in personal glory but in the quiet satisfaction of excellence shared with those ready to receive it. The environment doesn't demand recognition, she thought, remembering her own words from months earlier. It just needs someone listening carefully. That was the essential lesson Miller had taught her, and the wisdom she would continue sharing with anyone willing to learn. Outside her window, the city skyline stood illuminated against the night sky, keeping watch over an office where impossible had become inevitable through the patient application of human expertise. And somewhere in the distance, the next precision challenge waited for the next student, ready to discover that champions weren't born from titles or hierarchy, but from the courage to trust capabilities others couldn't see. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. The autumn sun cast long shadows through Sterling and Price's glass walls as Olivia prepared for her newest challenge. 2 years after, her 15 perfect shots had transformed the firm's competitive reputation. She found herself facing an entirely different kind of test. The corporate league had announced a revolutionary new format, team-based environmental shooting, that would require coordinated precision under constantly changing conditions. The dynamic challenge, managing partner Price explained during the executive briefing. 4 shooters working in synchronized harmony while environmental factors change every 30 seconds. No firm has ever attempted anything like this before. The assembled partners exchanged nervous glances. Even with Sterling and Price's newfound expertise in environmental shooting, this sounded impossible. One person might read atmospheric conditions with sufficient precision, but coordinating 4 different perspectives under rapidly shifting environments seemed beyond human capability. Bennett has developed a training protocol, Price continued, nodding toward Olivia, who stood quietly by the presentation screen. She believes we can not only compete but dominate this new format. All eyes turned to the woman who had transformed from administrative assistant to the firm's most valuable competitive asset. In the 2 years since her demonstration, Olivia had created an entire environmental analysis division that had revolutionized Sterling and Price's approach to competitive shooting. Traditional training focuses on individual perception, Olivia began, activating the presentation she'd prepared. But the dynamic challenge requires something different, collective environmental awareness. The ability to not only read conditions personally but to share that reading across a coordinated team. She displayed diagrams showing how atmospheric conditions would shift during competition. Temperature gradients creating rolling air currents. Lighting systems programmed to create oscillating patterns. Acoustic generators producing variable pressure waves. The challenge wasn't just difficult, it was designed to be impossible using conventional methods. How can anyone compensate for changes occurring every 30 seconds? Asked senior partner Reynolds. Even your methods require time for analysis and adjustment, Olivia nodded. Individual analysis would indeed be too slow. But what if we distributed the environmental reading across 4 specialists, each responsible for different aspects of the atmosphere? The concept was revolutionary. Instead of each shooter attempting to read all conditions independently, Olivia proposed a system where team members specialized in specific environmental factors. One person reading air currents, another analyzing light patterns, a third monitoring acoustic pressure, and a fourth integrating these readings into cohesive shooting adjustments. Like a symphony orchestra, she explained. Different instruments playing individual parts that combine into something greater than the sum of their components. The proposal was met with skepticism from traditional competitive shooters. Chambers, who had become one of Olivia's strongest supporters, voiced the concern everyone was thinking. That would require a level of nonverbal communication most teams couldn't achieve. How do you transmit complex environmental readings without disrupting concentration? Olivia had anticipated this question. Through shared sensory language. A system of subtle signals that communicate complex data without conscious processing. The same way musicians can adjust to each other during performance without speaking. She outlined a training program unlike anything the corporate shooting world had seen before. 4 months of intensive preparation focused not on individual shooting skills but on environmental reading and team coordination. The selected team would need to become so attuned to each other that they could function as a single perceptive organism. This is either brilliant or completely insane, Williams remarked. But considering your track record, I'm inclined to believe it's the former. Managing partner Price made the decision immediately. Bennett, you have full authority to develop and implement this training program. Select your team, design your methodology, and prepare for the dynamic challenge. Sterling and Price will either revolutionize team shooting or fail gloriously in the attempt. The responsibility was enormous. Olivia would not only be designing a revolutionary training approach, but selecting the team members who would implement it. The future of the firm's competitive reputation rested on her judgment. As the meeting concluded, Chambers approached her privately. You should be on the team yourself, Bennett. No one reads environmental conditions better than you do. Olivia shook her head. My value is in developing the system, not executing it. Besides, the corporate league still has limits on who can represent firms in official competition. Though Sterling and Price had bent many rules to accommodate Olivia's unique position, the league maintained strict requirements about team composition for major competitions. Only attorneys on partnership track could officially represent their firms. Rules can be changed, Chambers suggested. Your 15 perfect shots earned you considerable influence in the league. Some boundaries serve a purpose, Olivia replied. I can achieve more by developing others than by seeking personal recognition. That evening, as she reviewed personnel files of potential team members, Olivia reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 2 years ago, she'd been an invisible administrative assistant whose expertise went unrecognized. Now she was designing revolutionary training methodologies that might transform an entire competitive discipline. Yet her core philosophy remained unchanged. Excellence wasn't about personal achievement, but about developing systems that allowed human potential to flourish. The dynamic challenge would test that philosophy in ways she hadn't previously imagined. The team selection process consumed 3 intensive weeks. Olivia wasn't looking for the firm's best individual shooters, but for attorneys who displayed specific perceptual strengths that would complement each other. Daniel Reed, once arrogant, but now respectfully confident, demonstrated remarkable sensitivity to air current variations. His background in fluid dynamics before law school gave him an intuitive understanding of how air moved through enclosed spaces. Megan Rodriguez, who had transferred from client relations to the competitive division, possessed extraordinary visual perception. She could detect lighting changes that others completely missed, reading subtle brightness variations like they were boldly printed text. James Williams, formerly Olivia's harshest critic, but now one of her most dedicated students, had developed exceptional acoustic awareness. His musical background allowed him to sense pressure changes through sound before they became visibly apparent. The final team member was an unexpected choice. Andrea Chen, a recently hired associate with limited shooting experience but extraordinary integrative thinking, demonstrated an uncanny ability to synthesize information from multiple sources into coherent patterns. "These aren't our most decorated competitive shooters," Price observed when Olivia presented her selections. "No," Olivia acknowledged. "They're specialists whose perceptual strengths align with the distributed awareness system we'll be developing. Individual accomplishment matters less than collective potential." The training facility underwent complete renovation to accommodate Olivia's revolutionary methodology. Traditional shooting lanes were replaced with a dynamic environment chamber, where temperature, lighting, and acoustics could change in precisely controlled patterns. The electronic scoring system was upgraded to provide real-time feedback on both individual and team performance. On the first day of training, the selected team members arrived with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. They'd been chosen for a revolutionary approach that had never been attempted before, and the pressure of representing Sterling and Price in such a high-profile innovation was enormous. "Before we begin," Olivia addressed them, "I want to be clear about something. This training will be unlike anything you've experienced before. We're not focusing on individual shooting technique. We're developing a collective perceptual system that allows four minds to function as a single environmental reader." She outlined the core concept. Daniel would specialize in air current reading, Megan in light pattern perception, James in acoustic pressure sensing, and Andrea in integrative coordination. Each would develop extraordinary sensitivity in their specialized domain, then learn to communicate those perceptions to others without disrupting concentration. "How exactly do we communicate complex environmental readings without speaking?" Daniel asked. "I can't exactly shout cross-current at 3 meters in the middle of competition." Olivia smiled. "We'll develop a shared sensory language. Subtle, physical cues that transmit complex data without conscious processing. The same way a string quartet adjusts to tempo changes without verbal communication." The first month was dedicated to individual perceptual development. Each team member focused exclusively on their specialized domain, training their senses to detect increasingly subtle variations. Daniel learned to read air currents by watching how smoke patterns moved through the chamber. Megan developed sensitivity to light changes by identifying millisecond variations in illumination patterns. James trained his acoustic perception by detecting pressure changes through sound wave variations. Andrea's role was perhaps the most challenging. She needed to develop receptivity to all these specialized signals while maintaining her own shooting focus. Olivia worked with her daily, teaching integrative awareness techniques that Miller had developed for complex environmental reading. "Think of yourself as a conductor," Olivia explained. "You're not creating the individual parts. You're ensuring they blend into a cohesive whole." The second month introduced the communication system. Olivia had developed a language of subtle physical cues that could transmit complex environmental data without disrupting concentration. Specific finger positions indicating air current directions, eye movements signaling light pattern changes, breathing rhythms communicating acoustic pressure variations. These signals need to become so instinctive that you perceive them without conscious thought, she instructed. Like reading facial expressions. You don't think about the process, you simply understand the meaning. Progress was difficult and frustrating. Team members struggled to maintain their specialized perception while simultaneously receiving signals from others. Early attempts at coordinated shooting under changing conditions resulted in scattered results, far below their individual capabilities. "This isn't working," Daniel said after a particularly disappointing session. "We're actually shooting worse as a team than we would individually." "That's expected," Olivia replied calmly. "You're developing an entirely new perceptual system. Imagine learning to read for the first time. The process initially seems more difficult than simply looking at pictures. She adjusted the training approach, focusing on paired exercises before attempting full team coordination. Daniel and Megan worked together on air-light integration. James and Andrea practiced acoustic coordination combinations. Gradually, the pairs began developing synchronized awareness that exceeded their individual capabilities. By the third month, the team was ready for full integration practice. The environmental chamber was programmed to create complex, rapidly changing conditions similar to those they would face in competition. Air currents shifting direction every 30 seconds. Light patterns oscillating through variable sequences. Acoustic pressure waves creating unpredictable disturbances. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during their 6th week of integration training. Something clicked in the team's collective perception. Suddenly, they weren't 4 individuals attempting to coordinate. They were a single perceptive entity, reading the environment through distributed awareness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.